Okay, I have 5 o'clock, so we will begin. Welcome to our webinar today on taking the sting out of the conversation, how to help students hear voices they disagree with. Just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded. You are placed on mute, but if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat box. I will be monitoring it throughout the session. At the end of the session, I will post an evaluation link, so please take the time to complete the link before you sign off. We do appreciate your thoughts. We're glad to have you here this evening. My name is Kay Gandy, and I'm your host tonight. Our presenter is Aziza Hassan. Aziza was named an influencer by the Chronicle of Philanthropy and is the executive director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. She has extensive experience in program management and coalition building. An experienced mediator and conflict transformation practitioner, she has co-facilitated with multiple groups. Aziza's work has been featured on Aussie, Yahoo News, MSN, Public Radio's Speaking of Faith with Krista Tippett, the United States Institute for Peace, Arabic Radio and Television, and the LA Times. Her 2 years of AmeriCorps service gave her hands-on experience in community organizing and group problem solving. She earned the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2006 under President George W. Bush. Aziza served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships from 2015 to 2016, and the Executive Service Corps recognized her with a Megan G. Cooper Leadership Award in 2017. Aziza currently serves on Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti's Interfaith Advisory Council and is a volunteer mediator with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Aziza.
Thank you. I am really grateful that you all have taken the time to be with us in community during this really important just time to ask ourselves what it is to be conveners of conversations that are going to help people hear each other. And so how we frame issues really matters. And if we're going to create space for students to be able to explore ideas and find their own voices, then we need to be able to help them hear each other, and especially when the tensions start to mount. This webinar is really an opportunity for hands-on experience. So if you don't like hands-on, might not be the webinar for you. But it's really going to be about how we can get into and practice reframing the tough language without silencing people. Because it's when people feel silenced that we lose people, and when the tensions are they're way beyond our control. And so our focus is going to be to allow ourselves to hold space for others to be able to express their opinions, to feel seen, and then to eventually move people to a place where they can do the same for other people. To give you a little bit more, I know you got some good background on me. So I've been in a lot of different spaces just trying to make sure people are talking to and with each other. One of those spaces is called New Ground. And at New Ground, we bring Muslims and Jews together. And so in this particular instance, it must have been 5 years ago, we had 12 people, 12 Muslims, 12 Jews in this space. And it's considered like a year-long program where people are willing to go dive into relationship, but where we're carefully orchestrating the space and creating a container for people to be able to express themselves, to hear other people, and to really voice their truth in a way that is authentic to themselves. So they don't have to give up any part of who they are. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into constructing that space, from different activities on intentional listening to being able to practice mirroring and reflecting back to each other, and to really practice being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and make sure that it's a trusted space. And so here we are. We've worked our way. It's 4 months into the program. We've done a lot to make sure that all these conditions are happening, and that we have personal connections and relationships, lots of hopefully respect going across. And so we've got these 24 people in this circle, and one of the individuals in the group speaks up and he says, there is no way any of you have any idea what I am going through. I have the most at stake being in this room, and I'm taking the most risks. And I could hear people like take in that deep breath, like literally around that room. And one of the participants said, I have plenty at stake right here. And I take offense to that. And there was this thing that went back and forth. But ultimately in that moment, eventually, like, I looked at the person straight in the eye and said, would it be fair to say that you have a lot at stake right now and to be in this space? And in that moment, his red in his face started to come down a notch, and he started to breathe a little bit differently himself. But what was happening in the room and the tension that was building, I don't want to give the impression that tension's not a good thing. It can be a very healthy thing. But if we're going to allow people to hear each other, we have to let it, we have to draw it out. And so how do we draw it out? What is it that we say that's a little bit different from saying, no, I have a lot at stake, and shutting down somebody else, versus saying, is it fair to say that you have a lot at stake? So kind of diving in, like there's lots of pieces that go into being able to have these kinds of conversations where different voices can openly disagree with each other and still hold space and respect for each other all at the same time. We're only going into one particular tool in that toolbox. And let's see. So our agenda today is, we've done the introductions. We're going to talk about, very deliberately, reframing, zooming in really narrowly on how we might do this. We'll go through some different examples, and then we'll go into breakout rooms where we'll have everyone in pairs. You'll have 3 examples to reframe. We'll come back and then we'll unpack that together and then flow into Q&A before closing out. So pretty straightforward. Today's objectives are really going to be 2 really simple things. One is practicing taking the sting out of the conversation. And the second is really starting to feel more comfortable being uncomfortable. Because you, as the convener, as the person who's trying to create the space, need to start to feel like, the only way to actually get through this is to practice it. Like, we can talk about theory all day long, but until we start to test things out, we don't get to really harness that skill. So you have, you look at these beautiful faces. They're all smiling. They're all relatively the same shade, and they come from very different backgrounds, and they have really strong opinions and differing opinions. So how do you create a space? This is a picture of our high school program with New Ground. And I can tell you from very personal experience that each of them can hold their own really well. So how do you create community, cooperation, dialogue, compassion, and change? One of the tools is reframing. And so what do I mean by reframing? There's a definition that comes from the Conflict Transformation and Restorative Justice Manual. I reference it later on, so you can see my source, but I think that they frame it the best that I've seen. And they say responding to a speaker in a way that both validates and allows the person to move from a particular perspective and respond to in a more constructive way. So I'll say that one more time. So what we mean by reframing is to say it's responding to a speaker in a way that both validate and allows the person to move from a particular perspective and response to a more constructive one. And essentially, we're looking for what's underlying here. What is it that we need to give voice to? But before we give voice, we figure out what we need to be doing first. So someone says a statement like the one that I shared earlier. The first thing you do isn't respond. The first thing you do is breathe. Pause right here at the top of the screen. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of people, there's a lot of science behind this. Some people like to say count to 10, whatever. I'm just going to say just breathe. Take in a deep breath, hold it, and then figure out what's going on inside of you first. and what it is that the person said. And what I mean by that pause is actually regulating yourself, because you can't regulate somebody else if you yourself are not fully regulated. And the way you do that is to make sure that there's plenty of oxygen coming back to your brain and your heart and everywhere else that it needs to go. And you're starting to think, okay, what's the why? What's under here? So that you can actually get into that place. Because a lot of times people will say things and you as the convener will get triggered. So you self-regulating first is really important. And then the second thing that you do is you step to their side. Some people like to say step into their shoes, not on their toes. Other people, essentially, like the main theme here is you figure out how you can step to their side and figure out where it is that you can actually align. And you do that by listening. So so Dr. Mark Goulston has a book called Just Listen. And in it, he talks about this concept of listening to where they are actually at. And that's where you want to be. You don't want to put in anything that you're bringing in. You don't want to judge. You don't want to analyze, nothing. You just want to find where you can listen to where they actually are and what it is that they're trying to name. And you're trying to find the word to name it. If it's tough, then you're finding another word for it. But where you can, you're going to use similar words. So his tagline for this book is actually called The Secret to Getting Through to Absolutely Anyone. And essentially the hypothesis and the main premise here is listening. And then you actually say what it is that needs to be seen. You find the voice to it, and then you actually say it. And you say it to help further constructive conversation. So you say, yeah, this is great. How does it actually work? So here we go. We practice reframing. Someone says in your classroom or somewhere, they say, I just don't like this sort of thing. You could easily take that as judgment. Maybe it's a reflection on you. Maybe it's your choices. All these things, like the pause comes in, you lean in a little bit and you say something that could sound like this. What specific kinds of things bother you the most? So here we're actually naming, like, okay, clearly they're upset with this sort of thing. So what you're going for is, all right, like, what are the specifics here that really kind of bother you? So bother is it's connecting to, you know, like they're saying that they don't really like something. And so you're actually naming that they're not feeling settled. They don't like something here. So that's why these two things are important here. And then of course you threw a question mark at the end. The question mark should always be a place of curiosity. Like if you're trying to lead people, you're actually going to hurt the conversation. And so what do I mean by this? Also in Just Listen by Mark Goulston, he talks about mirror neurons. And what we're doing with reframing is we're getting people to hear and see something, and hopefully to hear and see how we might also hold the conversation a little bit differently. So to explain or unpack mirror neurons just a little bit, they're the neurons that help us with imitation, learning, and empathy. Mirror neurons are essentially the neurons that when there's a gap, when people don't feel like that they can connect and they feel shut down in some way, it actually activates cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And we don't want people in the stress hormone space. But when the mirror neurons are, you know, people are feeling it, they're connecting with us, what's happening is oxytocin gets released in the brain. And instead, that actually creates greater bonding between you and the class that you're trying to help work with. I know I'm going back to the last slide, but bear with me. I think this is really important. So like when you say things like that, you know, where you're talking down, when you are saying but, when you're talking at, when you're talking over, those are the kinds of things that widen the gap on the mirror neurons and that get people's stress hormones going. And that's not what you want. You actually want to move people into a place where they're calm and they're able to think and talk too. So thank you for going back with me to Dr. Goulston. So another example here on practice reframing is the lazy slob is always late. Well, that's just great. It's the last thing I want to hear. So one way to reframe this is to say, being on time is very important to you, isn't it? And so here again, we used a question, but we also named the issue of time and that it's important to that person. He's a lying traitor. There isn't an ounce of truth in what he said. Wow, you see things completely differently. You're still naming it, but you're more gentle with your words. If he would act responsibly, I would get my work done. So there's a group project, another student is complaining to you. What specific things from him would help you get the work done? And then finally, everyone in class has had trouble with him. Could you tell me more about your interaction with him? So you're seeking information, you're suspending all forms of judgment, you're leaning in by listening and finding your curiosity, but you're naming really specifically what it is the person is offering. And while sometimes we might be triggered by what somebody is offering, it's a gift. And if we take it and we find a way to give voice to it, then we start to help people feel like they belong in our space. And I think this is one of the big reasons why we hear a lot about angst around political correctness. When we can actually create a space where people feel seen, heard, and like they belong, they're able to carry out and continue with the conversation. And our goal is to try to keep people in the conversation so that we can get to the hard stuff, so that we can learn and actually feel invested. And I would say one more thing to say why we would do reframing is, so Todd Rose, who's a Harvard Graduate School of Education, he's published widely, and he talks about specifically like investment in education and making sure that we're drawing people out in our classrooms and we're reorganizing things. And like one of the things he says is that for me, the hardest part about learning always boiled down to figuring out why I should care. Other people's expectations mattered to me, but they rarely clinch the deal. I need to build up my own reasons to engage. But once I jump over that hurdle, I'm good to go. When we create systems where people feel like they want to engage because they're wanted, they are valued, and they are seen, we can create greater investment. And so if you're creating a space for reframing, as the person who's making sure that you're helping release the sting in the room, or maybe it's a conversation, or maybe it's a buildup before a bigger conversation that you really don't, like you want to be able to control a little bit differently, it's actually making sure that people can see each other by neutralizing just a little bit, but still naming what needs to be heard. So with that, I'm going to ask you to take a look at these 3 statements and write them down. This is reframing in pairs and in your breakout room. The first statement that you are going to practice reframing is, you must get off on throwing your power around. You must get off on throwing your power around. Second statement that you're going to reframe in your pairs is, all lives matter. All lives matter. And the third statement that you are going to reframe is, if X people weren't so violent, I'm sure the media coverage would change. So if X people weren't so violent, I'm sure the media coverage would change. So our goals here are not going to debate any one of these issues. It's to practice the reframing piece. And so what you're going to do is, we're going to send you to the breakout rooms. You'll want a sheet of paper to make sure you're writing and rewriting, because sometimes it's just the act of rewriting and rewriting where we gain muscle here. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. You'll have randomly assigned partners, and then and you'll come up with, your goal is to come up with at least one. You could come up with multiple reframes on the same one, but at least one for each of the 3. All right, so I'm going to show you the questions, the statements again. And then right now you're going to be sent to the breakout rooms, and I will, well, it's not going to work. So you'll be sent back to the breakout rooms. All right. So Are there any questions before we send you there? Hopefully I gave great directions, but if you do, you can always stay here for a second and then go back. But please go ahead and accept your pairing and start working on these 3 statements, and I will see you back here.
We're back.
Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had some really great discussions in your breakouts, and we got you self-regulating. So let's start with the first one. You must get off on throwing your power around, huh? I could totally see someone saying this. I've had this said to me. So let's dive in. What were some of the reframes that you came up with? Feel free to unmute and share.
You're very passionate about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like having a voice in decision making is important to you.
Beautiful.
Does it feel like everyone does not have a significant voice here?
Say that one more time, Tracy. You were cutting out.
That's my internet's horrible. Does it feel like everyone doesn't have a significant voice here?
Is it here like everyone has a significant stake here? Is kind of what I think I heard, but I'm filling in some gaps. So if you want, you can type it into the chat and maybe that'll help.
Does it feel like everyone does not have a significant voice here?
Ah, there we go. That's a very big distinction. Does it feel like everyone else is not having a significant voice here? That's pretty solid. Thank you. Any other reframes? All right. Well, those were beautiful. So the way I would reframe it is to say, so you feel like I'm taking too much control. How would you like to do things differently? So like you're naming that they feel like control is important, or like that you're owning your part of this constellation, I guess, or situation, and you might ask for feedback on how things might be changed so that you could adjust. So you're not assuming. But I love what you said about it sounds like you have a lot at stake here, right? So like there's any number of ways we can do it. What we absolutely want to do is we don't want to shy away from the challenge. We actually want to name the challenge. Like where we can, we're softening it, but we're still naming it. All right. Does anybody want to discuss this one a little bit further before we move to the fun one? All right, here we go. All lives matter. What are some of your reframes?
I said, this is true, but why do you think certain groups feel so unseen or unheard that they need to say specific lives also matter?
Can you say that one more time? As slow as you did the last time?
This is true, but why do you think certain groups feel so unseen or unheard that they need to say specific lives also matter?
Sorry, I'm going to write as we go. Thank you for that. So we'll take all of them and we'll unpack together. Appreciate that. Who else would like to chime in?
It's in the chat. We can agree that everyone should be respected.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We should at least have one more. I'm sure we should have 7 total, but I'm not counting. So who else wants to share?
Mine is sort of based around the same idea of respect, but I'm hearing in this statement that you have a deep respect for human life.
Beautiful. Thank you. Who else? Okay, that's fair. I think actually this is an important thing that I wanted to mention anyway, so it seems like the natural place to say it. I think it's really critical that we don't call out students in our classrooms specifically, that we actually open, like you can take what it is that's being said, you give the reframe and you offer it right back into the space. But you don't actually say, Mark, can you please say something? And Mark's like the only student of whatever background just got attacked. We actually just put it back out. And so and I'll give you more specifics there, but it's really important that anybody in this space feels like they are ready to speak. So we're just going to create the space so that it's an offering and we're going to be comfortable with silence, and the pause is just going to actually help us flow in our space. And so the pause doesn't just happen when you're triggered, which, I mean, when you, as soon as I don't know, like, was this one a little bit more challenging than the first one? Okay, it was for me. I had to sit there and like think for a while. So I'm just going to own my space.
Yes, absolutely it was.
Thank you. So like, there was a lot of self-regulation, and sometimes we need some extra help and support. And that's why it's actually really important for you to be in breakout rooms. Because you having community, like where like sometimes you feel like you did a reframe and it didn't land the way you thought it was going to land, or etc. Like you learn from it, you adjust, and you find a peer who you can trust and talk through it. Because ultimately, like, we're all going to burn out, because this is the kind of work that is really important, and it takes a lot of emotional, it takes a lot out of us. Especially as we're trying to create this kind of space. So when you say this is true, but why do you think that so many groups don't feel seen or unheard, and they need to say specific lives? I didn't catch the full ending there, but like I really want to zoom in on the first part. And the last part. So what you're saying is this is true, right? So if you're going to say something like this, I would say I would actually say what it is that they said. Like, it is true that life is sacred, or you could say life. So it sounds like I'm hearing that life to you, like what you're trying to say is that life is sacred, or that, and then instead of the word but, I would actually just take it completely out of the sentence. So you could make it a question still. You could still have the directness if you really wanted to include it in, but I would take the what but completely out of the construction of it. This is called yes, and it's called stepping to their side. It's the way that we can still put ourselves in their shoes, because they are giving us an offering here, but let's just not step on their toes in the process. So that you could still ask, why do you think so many groups feel that? What I would offer in a reframe, especially if you're trying to make sure that they're still talking, like, I think this is a really good direct example. And especially when you're saying like specific lives, like why, you're asking a curious question back. But I want to put pause here and come back to it at the end once we unpack all three. All right. So then the next one I heard was, we can agree that everyone respects human life. I think that's what it was. So I think what I'm hearing from that statement is like, maybe we can agree. I think that's it can be a good tactic, but if you really want to just make it so that they feel heard, which is essential when we're trying to make sure that they belong in your space, you could still say we, but like, I would still actually say it sounds like you are trying to lift up that human life is sacred. And so I would actually still be very direct with it and what they're trying to offer you. And then the last part is how, oh my goodness, my handwriting is atrocious. All right. I'm hearing you state that something about deep respect for human life. Like, you've actually heard me say that a couple of times, so you kind of already know where I'm leaning in terms of how I would reframe it. So if I were in this situation trying to reframe, here's what I would say. I would say, I hear that it's important that every life has it, that we raise up every life as valuable. What concerns you? So like, I'm still offering it. I'm still saying that, like, they're saying that all human life is valuable. What concerns them about the statement Black Lives Matter? Because that's really what we're talking about. So, and in that way, like, they can kind of raise up, right? And then my follow-up question, because it's not a singular, like, here we're throwing this one term out into the ether, like, this is an important conversation that we're having. And the second follow-up question is, I'm wondering if anyone else sees things in another way. Or maybe it could also be a follow-up question to what you were saying, Ebony, is like, I wonder why folks feel that there's a need to say Black Lives Matter, right? To get really specific here. But in the first part, I've diffused by allowing that person to see and feel heard. And then I'm doing a little bit more gentle, curious question asking. So what thoughts do you have here?
Are you asking
I have
specifically?
Anybody.
Okay.
Always feel free to move to speak, but anybody here.
I think I worry about what comes next. So I reframe that, and I have tried in many conversations, but then the person continues to say that and they aren't able to take in or understand why certain groups are calling out their group. I don't know if that makes sense. It's what comes next. So I can reframe it, but if they don't accept that reframing, how do I still diffuse the situation and make that person feel heard?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why I'm advocating curiosity here. Like, I think that as an educator too, like, you actually have, I'm assuming you're educators. I'm actually making the one thing I just told you not to do. So if you are a convener of any kind of conversation where you feel like, you know, someone's at a disadvantage or they're not getting something, then like that's where we actually lean more like so yes, our fear can sometimes actually even shut us down too. And I think that's part of our own self-awareness. And that's why having a team around me where I know that I know exactly who I can pick up the phone with and say, like, I really messed up here. I need your help. Like, is so critical. But if you're going to follow the principle here, especially on reframing and the power here of listening, if you can say it in such a way that helps that person actually feel like, yeah, like I hear you lifting up that all lives are sacred. What concerns you with the statement that Black Lives Matter? And I would name it directly. And you're right, like, it's scary. And that's why curiosity instead of leading is a really helpful tool in your toolbox, because you're not leading and you're allowing other students in your space to be able to voice their opinion. And if anything, we want everybody to be able to talk. And so sometimes it actually, like, when I'm in a facilitator situation, like, I'm up front, this is my background, this is why I do what I do. And my job is to be like the water in this room, like, just to flow, make things flow between. And like, I'm here as someone who's here to help make sure that we're having constructive conversations. And making sure that students or people in the room are able to feel like they can voice what they need to voice. And that when they offer it, they don't feel marginalized. Because when you do it to one, like, another is going to see, and like, there's so many important pieces here. And like, it's literally, it's not that you're like, none of us are ever really neutral, but what we can be is we can make sure that people feel fully seen and respected. But seen is the better word here. Like, that's what we want. We just want people to feel seen. What is it that we can name that we can actually lift up to make sure that they feel seen? Because when people feel seen, they feel like they belong. And when they belong, I mean, ultimately, Goulston talks about this in his book and a number of other people, but like when we, a lot of us, most of us have a tendency to want to, that we ache for people to care about us. And so if you can create a space where the students or the people in the room genuinely feel like you care about them, then you can challenge them a little bit more. All right, last question, unless there's more conversation here, because this is delicate and it's likely, it makes my heart rate go a lot faster. And like, I have to do a lot to just make sure that I'm fully present.
Actually, I have a
I would like, absolutely, just give me 1 second, Jessica, okay. Is like, if I'm going to have a difficult conversation, especially if it has to be on Zoom, I'm going to shut down the chat. Chat, I will get rid of every distraction that I possibly have so that I am like fully engrossed and I can see every single person's face. The only reason why I can't see every single one of your faces right now is because I need to have my screen open on the reframing things. But otherwise, like, I would absolutely make sure that I can see your face. All right, Jessica, please lean in.
So I teach social studies at the middle school and the high school level, and I teach about, well, I recently had my students read an article called Uniting for Black Lives, and they took notes and we had a conversation about it. And I did a lot of this reframing, but then a couple white families have now reported me to my principal as being biased because I taught about systemic racism and that it exists. And they actually want me to teach, quote unquote, the other side, which there isn't, but they want me to, I really don't know, legitimize, I guess, their, which I won't do it, but they want me to legitimize their racism almost. And the one particular student I was, he was a white kid and I reframed it and I laid out all the monitoring things that I was doing so that we wouldn't have anybody saying things that were inappropriate, but he just went ahead. And now those parents are bullying me because I teach the truth. So yeah. I'm just wondering if anyone else has had that issue or like how to handle it. Because I have a lot of students of color and they felt great that they got to read something that, is happening right here. I live in Minnesota and, but there's these few families that are out to get me because of that.
That sounds really hard, really, really hard, that you're trying to do something that offers value and feeling completely undermined. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't imagine like the host of feelings that you must be feeling. I heard you use the word truth and just wanting to present something that's like real. So given that, did I get that? Is there something I'm missing?
About
where you're sitting?
No, you got it. I mean, I'm just, first of all, super disappointed and I'm burnt out from those kind of parents. And I'm really like, I didn't really get support right away from my administrators either because they didn't know how to handle it. And I do the reframing and all of that, but what do you do when outside forces like the parents come at you? Because nothing went wrong in my class. It was a great conversation. I redirected, all of that. I talked with people afterwards, but then these families went over my head and complained. They didn't even talk to me. So.
Yeah. So it sounds like feeling completely undermined and like you said, disappointed and you said burnt out. And like, that's the stuff that we want to try to, if we burn out, like Like that's not exactly like the vision that we want for the future, right? Like we actually want to create a cohort of like making sure that we can do this, because I have a hunch that you believe in this. It sounds like you have really strong conviction. So
Well, my whole department does. I'm lucky to have a good social studies department. So we've worked together a lot and support each other.
so having support from peers, it sounds like, is definitely something you lean on. So a couple of things and thoughts for both the parents and even the administration. So two thoughts. So we have this high school program that we do, and we intentionally frame it as like, this is going to be a really tough, this is going to, the whole point of why we're getting together is to have difficult conversations. And we want you to know what we're doing. And so actually at the very front end of the program, before anything starts, we have the parents come in. The kids are in another room with another, you could call them educators, series of educators, and then the parents are in the room with me. And then where I'm walking them through, and first they're getting an experience of like what the kind of things that we're going to cover, kind of giving them experience connecting with each other, but then also really having directed, pointed conversations. Like this is a leadership space where we're going to be pushing kids to the edge, and we want them to own their voices, and we want them to rise, and because really we want them to be strong, to have that strength. And so in those moments where it's difficult, what we like, you could being explicit kind of ahead of time, like ahead of the conflict itself, being able to say like, in those moments, we're going to ask you to make sure that you're being curious, and that you're asking them questions that like what they need in terms of support to own their own voice. And so that's the one thing that we do with our program. And the reason why we do it is because usually, actually like clockwork, 6 months into our program, we get some phone calls from at least like 3 parents that say like, why did you have X speaker? Why did you cover X material? I want the other side. And we will say, I'm so glad you called. Like we want to make sure that everything, like our communication lines are always open. And like our explicit methodology here is that we're offering perspective, but especially want the kids to make sure that they're owning their own voices. And like, people will push us and they'll say like, you're too liberal on X or Z, or you're too conservative on X or Z, or whatever is in between. We started to create something called, I'm a really big Google Docs person, and I know that there's other forums here. But literally where we have a Google Doc that has the rules there, but like, if somebody wants to offer a resource that they feel is valuable, they can actually have the link to the doc, and they with a title, but they have to put their name there and an explanation of why they think it's important, like maybe a short summary. So that's one thing. It kind of loosens the reins just a tiny bit. But the other thing is having a really direct conversation with administration and saying, I don't feel like my back was supported. I want to have a direct conversation. Are you ready to listen?
Yeah,
and
I
so
did do that.
Okay, excellent. And like your support with your peers, like that's just like so critical. But then also, and like this is where trying to be a little bit, so like the naming of our own self-regulation, when we start labeling people as like they're undermining us and etc., like we actually cease to be able to have a conversation where we see that they offer any value. And so that's where our own self-regulation is so important. Like we're triggered to our absolute max. And we actually can't be having a conversation when we're triggered to our max. So how do we even like reframe for ourselves how we could possibly see any value in these parents that are really, really challenging us? I'll offer that for now, but I'm always happy to strategize and listen maybe a little bit later after, just so we get to the third one. And we can take it from there if that's okay. Hopefully part of this was helpful, but like, yeah, an earnest conversation where we're still, I mean, that's why like reframing even for ourselves is absolutely critical. All right, so now to the third one. If X people, fill in whatever blank here, if X people weren't so violent, I'm sure the media coverage would change. So what were some of the combinations you came up with? If X people weren't so violent, I'm sure the media coverage would change. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I'll come back to it so you can see my resources later, but I'd really prefer to see your faces. So what do we have to offer?
I just put down what should the media cover?
A question right back. Okay, thank you.
We talked about asking, what do you think is motivating the protests? The people that are protesting, what's behind it?
Mm-hmm.
And then we also talked about, if you don't want the media to cover this, what would you want them to cover? And why wouldn't you want, this isn't nicely framed, I guess, but why wouldn't you want the media to cover something that's happening right now that seems pivotal?
Thank you.
Maybe like also what does social media cover versus like public media?
Thank you. What do you think would cause, I'll open the chat. Here we go. What do you think would cause someone to act that way? Ooh. All right.
The protest may have a unified message, but the violence may not have that, may not be unified in a message.
Yeah, so that's like a statement. So with the, if anybody else wants to offer, if you don't, that's fine. No? Okay, so the questions, especially on like, what do you think is motivating the protests, assumes that it's about the protests. So you're actually starting to like, is that what we're talking about? Like, so we actually have to have like some kind of a question mark at the end. It's interesting because like, you know, like it could be about crime reports and statistics somewhere else, but I guess context is everything. But there is an assumption in those reframes. So be wary of your assumptions. And that's why like, yes, naming and then asking for like, did I get that? Or like, is that what we're talking about, is so important so that we don't go down a rabbit hole that was an unintended thing. The way I would reframe this is to say, all right, you feel that there's a lot of violence and that concerns you. So you're naming specifically, like there's a lot of violence and it concerns you. And then I would say, like you have a couple of paths that you can follow. You could say, that's an interesting hypothesis. I wonder if we can test it. And like, you could make it into more research, right? Follow up. And you're kind of turning to wonder. You're still in that curious space. Or another thing is you could say, let other people talk about how that landed on them. So you could literally say, you know, you feel that there's a lot of violence and that concerns you. I wonder how that landed on other people in our class. So the words are so like neutralized. Does that make sense? Like they should flow so that you're pulling people in. That's our goal. And it's so hard. It's so hard to let go of our assumptions. But your critical tool to let go of your assumptions is sometimes to just name it and then ask them if that's what we're talking about. So all of this is like, you know, some people will say it's a science. Some people say it's an art. Like, I would say, you know what, it's like something that we all need to just practice and be there for each other, because ultimately it's the ability to say it, to practice, to fail, and to stay calm through all of it that is, that's really going to help us get better and to learn from our mistakes. And it's really the foundation and the building blocks for success in a variety of fields. as much as I would like to say that like that's my direct quote, it's not. It actually comes from Todd Rose, the head of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So, I mean, like really, this is foundational stuff, and it's not rocket science, but it is remarkably hard and challenging, and that's why knowledge of the self is so important. Awareness of like where we sit and the ability to really lean in and listen and just name very simply without judging, by judging, I mean like don't offer any label, use the same word that they're using, and then be like, you can let out a gentle reframe. But like sometimes like, so I always have somebody who's with me in our facilitated space. And I find that to be really, really helpful because sometimes I don't get it right. And sometimes my, partner will, and sometimes they won't, and I will. And so it's kind of part of the work. So wherever you can get help, especially on the really tough ones, the better. And I see in our chat that, so Flora has an offering that she's been holding difficult conversations at her district. And last night they had a panel of 4 students. That's one of the tools we use in our toolbox. We will actually have, panels of people come in. For us, it'll be like, 2 Palestinians come in, 2 Israelis come in, and they share their stories, and they have remarkably different stories, but different interests, but it's really personal. So like there's something about personal narrative and feeling that helps you have a more constructive conversation than having to wrestle about any facts on the ground. Like facts are like, they're hard. People will come up with their own facts. I think Jessica helped us outline that too, right? So like there's plenty that we can all be relying on, but like when we can empower the voices in the room, there's a treasure trove that's there, and we can actually have a solid conversation just with the people that we have there. But then when we feel like there is some kind of a deficit, like you can always bring in a panel, but coach them and make sure that you have a variety of perspective. And then the most important thing that I've learned over the years is it can't just stop at the panel. You actually have to send people into breakout rooms or some pairs or small groups of 4, very max 4, and have them talk and own their voices and dissent and say, this was terrible, and tell you why it was terrible. Even though it's going to hurt when they tell you that it was terrible, guess what? Like you've actually gotten them to speak their truth, and you gain more insight, and other people do too. And we get to a deeper place. So with that, I recognize that it is 4:00 and I appreciate your time. I'm happy to stay for 5 more minutes for anybody who's willing and wanting, but I wanted to thank you all for being willing to listen and lean into this space. We need you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aziza. That was wonderful. And please remember there is a short evaluation in the chat box. So we do appreciate your feedback. Take the time to do that for us.
Oh, you are very welcome. One last thing I promised, and I will just have right here, is my sources. So there you go. Everything that I referenced is right here.
Lisa, I had a quick question. I heard you say something to the extent that students need to be comfortable speaking, and that's an important part of how we facilitate our virtual classrooms, which I completely understand. I agree with. I'm trying to figure out, there's a lot of teachers I hear are talking that they're teaching to dark rooms. The kids aren't turning on their cameras and they're not really fully engaging. And so I'm wondering if you have any techniques for, check for understanding, because that's something that's important. And if we're not getting feedback from students, and cold call is not the thing that we're doing any longer, if you have any, ideas for that.
Yes. I feel that loud and clear. Like I'm in my own parenting group every Saturday with a remarkable human being, because I recognize that having community around me is important. I'm a mother of 2, and like sometimes it's excruciating to get them to fail focus and turn on their cameras. And then I watch how different teachers maneuver and online, and the teachers that are the most successful with my wiggly one are the ones that are I don't know where they get their compassion well reserved from, but they have a lot of it. And tone is like a magical thing online. And so it's interesting, like one of the teachers will ask a million times, same thing it feels like, but compassion is always consistent in her voice, and it makes a huge difference. The second thing that I will say is, like, especially with our high school students, we had to do we pivoted it online with everybody else. And what we did was we did a lot more breakout groups. Like, there's just something different about the breakout rooms, and getting people to talk. And then, like, the educator as the person convener, where possible, if like I had my ideal magic wand, here's what I would do. There's this organization called Narrative 4. You can send your students to it. They actually have trainings every single week. And the Narrative 4, especially if you don't have a whole bunch of educators for these breakout rooms, because I think that whoever's convening the conversation is like the trusted person that, like, I know I'm going to be safe in this space. Even if somebody says something, like, somebody's going to still catch me and say, like, Aziza, I see you, right? If I'm a student. But narrative, so ideally you have an adult facilitator who's trained and is willing to do the reframing at the cost of like, it's hard work. But if you don't have an educator, like in Narrative 4, like you can actually send your students there. It's completely free, and they can be trained as facilitators. And then I would bring them back into my classroom and say, all right, I need you to be in these different rooms. And so, I mean, you could even send your whole class, I guess. It could be extra credit, but breakout rooms, I think, especially online, is where it's at, where they talk with each other, and then as an educator, you can pop into the different rooms. But the feedback, like, you're right, it's such a gift when we can get feedback. And I read, must have been last week, a report that said that on Zoom, we actually need 40% more of our capacity, whatever it is, like brain capacity, just to be able to read people online versus in person. Like, it takes that much out of us. And so, like, the kids are exhausted, like I'm exhausted. And I have like so many things that are in my background, but if I can make it where the kids are excited and interested in connecting with each other, I think that's where we win. Because ultimately, sometimes, like, even in our program, people are like, peace out. Like, I don't really want to talk to my educator very much, right? But I will learn so much more from my peers. I mean, it's not even just about learning, it's about connecting. And if we know the magic is peer-to-peer, let's leverage it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for that question.
Aziza, I had a question, if there's time.
Please.
So I thought a lot about what Jessica was saying, and I was wondering, would, like, a situation like that, would it benefit from pulling out some of the personal piece in it and using concepts like, to say to the parents, when we're talking about these particular situations, we're looking for, is this a situation where it's power over, and how can we make it power with? Or like the idea of, who do we see represented in this, and who do we not see represented in this, so that the families don't feel, people are going to come to the conclusions that they want to come to if they have a fixed mindset in the space that that's what they're going to do. However, in the conversation, trying to balance and leverage the idea that they can take what has been given and then come and see some of the other perspectives and sides of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, makes lots of sense. So, like, what you were saying about power with and power with, like, to me, it's like, okay, how are we constructing the conversation, right? So, like, right now, Jessica feels kind of, or what I heard was like attack, right? Undermine, like all these really big things that, like, like first there's that self-reg piece, but the power with somebody who I feel like is overshadowing me, like here's what I would actually take it person by person. And I know that's ridiculously exhausting. Or like, that's where administration is like so critical, that you have it's not a neutral person, but it is somebody who can, like, you can explain and they can help be your ally. Right. But with the power with situation, like, I mean, I'm on the phone a lot with parents, and I will say, like, or with, forget it, like, say it's like other people who are genuinely taking issue with something that's happening. Like, I know that that's a natural part of being able to be in disagreement with people, and that's actually part of relationship. And like, once I can actually name it and say, like, that's part of it, like, I can actually say, like, look, I think that I heard you say, like, you're really invested in your kids' education, and I am too. How can we work together? How can we do those sort of things? But that means, like, you're also listening to them too. So something happened when I was and I've spoken about this a little bit before on another separate webinar. My sister had come home from school. She's 3 years younger than I am. And like, her face was flushed red. And like, she was in high school, and she just wouldn't stop crying. My mom, she told me that her teacher had said something in class, and he was so angry. Not angry. She felt like she didn't belong. We're Arab, we're Muslim. My mom's Caucasian. But in that moment, I realized that no matter how hard we worked, we were never going to belong. Like, we were never going to be accepted. And that's where my brain went. And I felt like a failure because my little sister, I'm supposed to have her back, and I had no idea what to do for her. And in that moment, my mom, who came home from a second shift at work because she's a single mom, she said, she heard the same exact story I did, had a completely different response. And she said, I'm going to school tomorrow. And so my mom is one of those challenging parents. And so she went to school and she talked to the counselor and she talked to the teacher. He pulled the teacher in. And to our biggest surprise, like, the teacher didn't become defensive. He didn't become angry. He didn't like wash it away or say he didn't say it. He was horrified that he'd hurt his student. And so, like, by giving him the benefit of the doubt, and my mom saying, like, look, my baby's hurting. Can you see her pain? Still offensive, like, as in like there's a strong thing here, but like, they were able to work with each other. And eventually, actually, his compassion and his compassionate response is what helped neutralize a lot of emotion. And this is like one of those stories that have like really stayed with me of, all right, like, how we respond to each other, like, especially when we're deeply hurt, really matters. But like, that took a lot of investment on her part, my mom's part, on the teacher's part, the administration's part. And like, to think about it, especially when it escalates beyond like a smaller group. But like, what I've seen time and time again is like, the way you can really navigate conflict more effectively is when you do it one-on-one and you break it down. It's not me against another group. It's me in conversation with another human being, so that we're seeking understanding and we really are in a place of with, not over.
Thank you, Aziza. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but there are others who use this Zoom account. And so we do have to end our session, but we do appreciate all of you for being here. I know you gained a lot this evening, as I did. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.